who should have power? I mean, it's one of the oldest and most important questions we've ever asked ourselves. Should it be a king? Should it be the people? And hey, once someone gets that power, how do we stop them from abusing it? So today, we're going to trace this epic debate all the way from 17th century European theory to the 20th century lived experience of the East, exploring two very different answers to the exact same timeless problem.
So here's the game plan. We'll kick things off by imagining a world with absolutely no rules, and then we'll dive into the agreement people made to create some order. We'll look at how to put limits on that power before we shift gears and see how power feels to the individual and between nations. And finally, we'll wrap up with the one question that ties this whole thing together.
All right, so to figure out the best way to govern, a lot of Western philosophers started with this really cool thought experiment. They imagined stripping away everything, kings, laws, police, you name it, to see what humanity is like in its most basic form, what they called the state of nature. So what do you think? I mean, really, with no one in charge, would we all live in some kind of peaceful harmony? Or would it be total, absolute chaos? Well, one English philosopher who was writing right after a bloody civil war had a very clear and pretty grim answer.
That was Thomas Hobbes. His argument was that, in the state of nature, everybody has a right to everything, which, as you can imagine, leads to a constant war of all against all. It's a terrifying picture, right? Just survival of the fittest, where you can't trust anyone, and life, as he so famously put it, is short and just miserable. For Hobbes, the only escape from this nightmare was for people to surrender their freedom to an all-powerful authority, a ruler strong enough to force everyone to keep the peace.
Okay, so if life without government is so awful, how do you get out of it? The solution these thinkers came up with was, for its time, a pretty revolutionary idea, a kind of deal, an agreement they called the social contract. The basic idea here is a trade-off. We, the people, agree to give up some of our absolute freedom, the freedom to just take whatever we want. And in return, a government or a sovereign gives us security, safety, and order. But, and this is a big but, not everyone agreed on the fine print of this deal.
Now this is where it gets really interesting because you see this huge divide. For Hobbes, the contract was a one-way street. The people give up their rights to an absolute king, and that's it, you can never take them back. But for John Locke, nope, it was a two-way agreement. He argued we have these inalienable rights, life, liberty, and property, that no government can ever take away. And here's the kicker. If a ruler violates those rights, the people have the right to revolt. It's like Locke built a safety valve right into the system.
Okay, so Locke's right to revolution is a powerful check on a government gone wild, but let's be honest, it's a pretty messy one. This got people thinking. Is there a better way? Can we actually design a government that controls itself, one that prevents power from being abused in the first place?
So, this French philosopher, Charles Montesquieu, was living under an absolute monarchy in France, and he was deeply worried about despotism, the exercise of absolute, unchecked power. He looked across the channel to England's government and, well, he might have gotten some of the details a bit wrong, but he thought he saw a brilliant solution for keeping that power in check.
And this right here is his big idea. Montesquieu argued that government power should be split into three different branches. You've got the legislative, which writes the laws, the executive, which carries them out, and the judicial, which interprets them. By keeping these separate, and by giving each branch some power to check the others, no single person or group could ever become all-powerful. This idea, the separation of powers, would literally become the blueprint for the U.S. Constitution.
All right, so we've got these grand theories for how you structure power, but let's bring it all down to earth for a second. How does any of this actually affect the average person just trying to live their life?
Look, the state of nature, the social contract, these are powerful ideas, no doubt, but they're still just that, ideas, theories. What happens when the individual citizen comes face to face with the laws, the bureaucracy, the actual authority of the state? For that, we need to shift our perspective from the West to the East.
And this is where the great 20th century Tamil writer Puthamai Pithan comes in. While those Western thinkers were designing systems from the top down, Pithan did the opposite. He started from the bottom up. In his powerful essays, collected under the title To Whom Belongs the Power, he looked at the real and often frustrating lived experience of democracy for the individual.
And Pithan's take on this is just so sharp. He argues that while democracy promises to serve the individual, the reality is often a confusing maze of bureaucracy and authority. The state, trying to create order, ends up weaving this web of control that can feel pretty oppressive. It creates this fundamental tension, this constant push and pull between the freedom we're promised to citizens and the very real power of the state that governs us.
And you know what? This tension between the individual and the state, it doesn't just stop at the border. The exact same dynamics of power, control, and conflict play out on the world stage between entire nations themselves.
Montesquieu had a thought on this too. He believed that the very second you form nations, you create a state of war between them. Each country, trying to protect itself and its own interests, is naturally in conflict with all the others. It's kind of like Hobbes' state of nature, but with countries instead of people.
But once again, Puthamaipitthan comes in with a much more modern, more critical view. He wasn't just talking about some abstract state of war. He put a name to the specific system of power that he saw dominating international relations in his time: imperialism.
For Pithan, this was way more than just armies fighting on a battlefield. He saw imperialism as a deeper system of control, where one powerful nation imposes its economic and political will on another. It's a form of domination that extracts resources and suppresses local culture, proving that power between nations goes far, far beyond just declared wars.
So, where does this all leave us? We've gone from the theoretical need for a government to escape chaos, all the way to the very real feeling of being governed. And the whole conversation, it seems, always comes back to one simple but incredibly profound point.
Whether we're talking about Hobbes' all-powerful king, Montesquieu's checks and balances, or Puthamaipitthan's critique of the modern state, every single one of these thinkers was wrestling with the same fundamental problem. It's a question that just echoes through the centuries.
Adhikaram Yaruku. To whom belongs the power? It's not just the title of Puthamaipitthan's work, it is the most vital question in politics, period. Is it the state's? Is it ours, the people's? And how do we ensure that whoever holds it uses it for the good of all? Well, that's a question we're all still trying to answer.